Good evening, good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. We'll get started. Good evening and good afternoon for those wherever you may be. Just a reminder that I've turned off the comments, so if you would like to if you have a question, then you press the box at the bottom of your screen with the question mark, and I will be able to see those questions and answer them. I will generally answer the questions that are most related to the live. So if you have a question related to adverbs, there's a much better chance that it gets answered. So I don't generally answer random questions, so try to keep them close to the subject of the live. And one more thing, just as an announcement, because a lot of people have been asking, I am going to start the pronunciation course in about 10 days, and I will make a post on that very shortly. So you'll get a post about the pronunciation course. I can't wait to begin. And it will take place here on my Instagram account. So today we are going to talk about adverbs, their use and placement. And I think this is going to interest of a wide range of learners, from intermediate, pre-intermediate, all the way to advanced and teachers. When I talk about some aspects towards the end, the advanced level, dealing with placement, as you'll see here. So I'll define what an adverb is. I'll look at how to use them. We'll go through some of the examples. And then I want to talk about placement. Placement of adverbs is not actually talked about very much, a little bit, but I'm going to go into detail on at least one example to show you, and then I'm going to give you homework. We haven't had homework in a while, so let's get some homework. Now, let me just check questions to see if, good evening. So I assume you can hear me. Great. I just want to make sure the sound is fine. All right, so let's begin. The definition. Adverbs describe verbs, adjectives, other adverbs, and whole sentences. And I'm going to give examples of all of those. And adverbs describe how somebody does something or how something happens. Very generally, I've taken this definition from Murphy's Grammar. It's a very popular grammar book in several editions for several different types of learners or levels. So we're going to look at this part of speech today. Now, how to form the endings. Generally speaking, as most of us know, adverbs end in ly. So we have quick, the adjective. If we want to change the adjective into an adverb, we add ly, quickly. And about 80% of ly words are adverbs. So if you see an ly at the end of a word, there's an 80% chance or so that it's an adverb. Now notice I have the word ca dot. In English, we can say circa, ca dot. Circa is Latin and it means approximately or about. So if you're not exactly sure, you can say ca dot 80%, which means around 80%. Circa. And here are some of the irregular adverbs that don't end in ly. You can see them on the right of your screen. From the adjective to the adverb, we have well and fast and hard, late. Early is an adverb and an adjective. Daily and straight. So you can take a look at those. I will save this live, so don't worry if you don't get all of it down. I will check questions in a moment, but you'll have a chance to look at this again after the live. Now, here are words that end in ly, but are not adverbs. Remember I said 80% of ly words are adverbs, or about, maybe 75-80%. Here is a shortened list, a sample of those words that end in ly but are not adverbs. You can see them here: brotherly, bubbly, butterfly, chilly, portly. Portly is heavy. This is a very nice literary way of calling someone a little bit fat. So if you don't want, fat is considered negative. If you want to describe somebody in a positive sense of that word, then you say portly. Portly is it's a cheerful word to describe a person who's a little bit heavy. Pot belly is someone who's has a big belly. Prickly, that's something that's very sharp. So if you have a pen in your hand, a little pen for a thread, it can be prickly. Or plants can be prickly, actually. Some types of plants, like cactus, have pricks in them, so they're prickly. All right, and we have others here you can take a look at. And if you have any questions, quarterly, priestly, etc., princely, rally. All right. And there's a more complete list in the link that I've put below. Obviously, you're not going to be able to write all that down, but if you write the first part down and then search the keyword, you'll be able to find that specific page. All right, so now let's take a look at examples. We're going to look at now adverb examples of verbs with verbs, where adverbs describe verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and sentences. Before we do that, let's do this and then I'll check questions. So here are examples with verbs. This is perhaps the most common use of the adverb. In fact, the word verb is in the word adverb, so you can see that relationship is close and common. So it's no accident that verb is within the adverb, because this is often the relationship we see. She sings loudly. He drove fast. He drove quickly. So we have adverbs fast and quickly. One ends in ly, the other doesn't. And then, of course, sings loudly. So these describe verbs. This is the most common, but almost as common, not quite as common, but is examples with adjectives. This is where the adverb describes the adjective. So we have here, he is very short. Very is the adverb describing the adjective short. He became super famous. Super is informal here, but just to show you, super acts as an adverb here for the term very, or very, so very famous, super famous. This is an informal construction. And then we have the building appears to be leaning slightly. Slightly describes how it's leaning. It's leaning a little bit. So we have here slightly. Slightly means a little bit. And here we have adjective. The adverbs modify or describe adjectives. And it's interesting if you notice that the main verb here is often a linking verb. And I've listed those. They're very small. I'm sorry about that. But I've made a list of linking verbs. You can Google that and check the same list on your phone if you want. Now I will check questions just for a minute. All right. I'm looking for questions related to adverbs and I'm not seeing them yet. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. If you have a question related to adverbs, you can feel free to ask. Here is an adverb describing another adverb, and this is very interesting. Adjectives can't describe themselves because they're adverbs if they describe adjectives, but adverbs can describe other adverbs. In this sense, there's some of the most flexible parts of speech in the English language. The wedding party finished too quickly. So quickly describes finished. How did it finish? Quickly. But to describes how quickly it finished. So The wedding party finished too quickly. So too describes quickly. Quickly describes finished. And finished, of course, illuminates the wedding aspects of the wedding party. We know that it finished. It is not still running or continuing. So we can see the relationship of each of these words in a sentence. Here we have a common, I use very because we use very, very often. So I use it here, just so you know how it functions in the sentence. He ran very fast. So very describes fast, and fast describes, it's an adverb, which describes ran. How did he run? Fast. How fast? Very fast. So we have two adverbs, very fast. Very describes fast. Fast describes ran. And then, of course, ran is related to whom? To the subject, he. And there we have a complete sentence, and everything makes sense, except that I don't run very fast. That's the... Okay, let's continue. The last use is with sentences. Now, I want you to ponder this for a moment. Ponder means to think about it for a while. I want you to ponder these examples for a moment because they're a little bit more difficult. Whereas in the earlier examples with verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, you have an adverb describing one word. In these examples, one adverb describes a whole sentence, or actually a concept, which the sentence embodies or depicts. So here we go. Luckily, I landed on my feet when I jumped. So luckily describes that whole scenario. You didn't luckily land, you luckily landed on your feet when you jumped. It's luckily describes the whole event. You can't pin it to one word. It's describing the whole event. And so this is an adverb describing a sentence. This is really amazing. Now we have another one. Fortunately, I bought winter shoes. Winter's coming if you live in the northern hemisphere. So, fortunately, I bought winter shoes. What's the fortunate thing? Not that you bought. It's fortunate that you bought, but that's not that's only partially true. You're fortunate because you bought winter shoes, not just because you bought something. It's because you bought the winter shoes. So, fortunately describes the whole sentence. And likewise in example number 3, thankfully, no one got hurt. We don't say no one got thankfully. We say no one got hurt, thankfully. And so thankfully describes that whole concept. Everyone is safe, thankfully. And so we have 3 examples here. At the end, for homework, if some of you want to do it, you can compose your own sentence examples and send them to me, and we can do it. Now I'm going to start to talk about issues that are not talked about as often. And for the teachers out there, this could be very interesting. For advanced students, it might be interesting. These early examples are not so advanced. Let's just take a look very generally at the difference between adjectives and adverbs as it relates to placement within the sentence. She speaks perfect English. Perfect describes English. Not speaks. Perfect is an adjective describing English. Perfect English. She speaks English perfectly. Perfectly with the ly at the end is now describing how she speaks. She speaks English perfectly. So perfectly actually technically describes speak. What we don't say in English, we don't put the adjective or the adverb before the verb on many occasions. This is rare if you do this. She perfectly speaks English is not natural English. It's not natural English. I'm going to talk more about placement in about 2 minutes or 1 minute. But do you see? So we have the adjective in the first example before the noun English. We have adverb, which goes after the noun English, describing speak. And then we have another option, she perfectly speaks, which is not natural English. That would be incorrect. Now I say that, and I'm going to make a suggestion that seems to counter that. The most flexible part of speech in the English language is the adverb. Adverbs are very flexible. I've given you one example where they're definitely not flexible. But in general, adverbs are the most flexible. English is not a very flexible language if you compare it to those who have declensions like Latin or any of the languages with declensions, Polish, Russian, even German. But German's a little bit not so flexible either in that sense. But some of the other Slavic languages tend to be more flexible. English is not flexible except for adverbs are a big exception. Now let's take a look. I'm going to start with intermediate, and then I will gradually get to more difficult examples. I ran fast. Fast, of course, is the adverb, and that is a very standard sentence. Fast I ran is not grammatically okay, but it's not natural English. It's rather poetic. You might see it in a poem, but you would not, or literature perhaps, but not in a standard sentence. You would not say, fast I ran. I fast ran is wrong in every instance. No one uses that, neither in literature nor in regular daily communication. So we have one that's acceptable, I ran fast. The second one is literary, if you want to use it, not as common, but for an effect. And the third example is incorrect. All right, let's move to positioning. Now this gets a little bit more interesting, I think, for those teachers and advanced students. What I've done, I've just estimated based on my own experiences. So if you have a different experience, I would love to hear about it. In terms of the percentages, I've put percentages on the side of percentage of use that you're likely to encounter this positioning of the adverb. So let's read it. I have often changed jobs. I'm suggesting this is by far the most common construction with the present perfect. So whenever you have more than one verb, like a compound verb or helping verbs, or then you have, or modal verbs, I'm suggesting that the adverb is naturally placed in the center here with the present perfect. I have often changed jobs. 70% of the time you might encounter this. I have changed jobs often or often. I will just mention often and often. Both are correct. I use often, I think, or often. I use both, and I'm not even aware when I use them. They're both acceptable, often and often. So don't worry about the pronunciation. Both will be acceptable. I have changed jobs often. That's right. I normally say often. I think it's more common among native speakers to say often, but I pronounce the T often. Okay, 20% of the time you might hear it at the end, maybe a bit more. It's definitely not uncommon to put it at the end. Now, this is where it gets rather rare. Often I have changed jobs. This is not a common construction. It's grammatically correct. You could say it for emphasis. If someone asks, especially if someone asks about frequency and you want to emphasize often, perhaps you could lead with it, but it's not common. I often have changed jobs is not natural English. And I would avoid using it in this way. I have changed often jobs. I'm saying this is incorrect. Now, if there are native speakers listening, they might beg to differ. To beg to differ is I don't know. Well, it means to disagree. So some native speakers listening now might beg to differ, might disagree with me when I say that this is incorrect. I have changed often jobs. This is awkward for the same reason it's unnatural earlier when I said we don't normally put adverbs before nouns. They just don't go so well together. Adjectives obviously go before nouns. Adverbs, it's rarer that it sounds good or well. So you've got to be careful here. So I would say that's incorrect, the last one, but I'm open for discussion on that. Now let's see if we have, okay, not before a noun. Let me just finish this and I'll look at questions. Only for adjectives. Not, she speaks perfectly English. Remember the example earlier. This is awkward style. She speaks English perfectly. She speaks perfectly in English. If you want to put it before English, you can use the preposition in to separate, give some degree of separation between the adverb and the noun. It's a little bit like magnets. If you have these magnets that are opposite, they tend to sort of miss each other. They sort of resist coming close to each other. So adverbs and nouns tend to work the same way. She speaks perfectly in English. She speaks perfectly well. And you can omit English if it's understood from the context, and then you have no issues. All right. Now, let me just see here. Before we get to the summary, I want to check out some questions. Yes, I've just answered this was a question that I anticipated. Often or often. I say often, but it's probably more common to say often without the T. Both are fine. Now this is interesting. This is a really good question actually, because I hear it or see it when I'm listening to IELTS examinations or when they're practicing. Can we say e.g. rather than for example? No. You can write e.g. in a formal paper, e.g. This is Latin, essentially, basically means for example, but you can't say it. You never say e.g. It sounds very strange. Thank you. All right, I'm just looking here for questions related to adverbs. Thank you for all of these questions. I'm looking for questions related to adverbs in this lesson. Yes, I will talk about. Yeah, very fast, both are adverbs. Thank you. All right, I've talked about positioning here. All right, so this has been asked a lot. Will adverbs always be after the main verb? I've suggested that in most cases, if you look here in the placement positioning here, you can see here the main verb, it depends. So the main verb in present perfect is changed, and we have often or often before the main verb. And then the second most popular example, you have it afterwards. So the positioning will depend on whether it's a compound verb. Interestingly, I said that you can't say I often have changed jobs, but you can say I often change jobs. Often change is fine, but when you add the extra the present perfect with have, it doesn't read well, it doesn't sound well in English. So I have often changed jobs, but if you drop it and just have the present simple past or present perfect, I often change jobs. I often change jobs. Great question. So it depends, not always. Good question. Let me see here. The live will be taped. You can see it again. It'll be the first video. All right. I've answered a lot of these questions, I think. Yeah, Germanic languages are strict. Yes, that's true. Thank you. Oh, this is great. What is the definition of awkward? Awkward, in the way I use it, means not natural English. So if something is awkward or stilted, stilted is a very advanced word. If you speak with stilted English or awkward English, it means that it's not natural. So that's what I mean by awkward. And what we want to do, the best style, is that style which is most natural. And what is most natural? The style that most native speakers use. That's sort of how we derive style. People use, it's the rule of the majority. It's a little bit democratic in a sense, not always. Because dictionaries play a role and influence in this. At least it did earlier, and they were not always democratic in how they determined which words were acceptable and which words weren't. All right. Some of these are so small that I can't read them. I'm very sorry about that. If you could make it a little bit bigger, I can see it. Some of these are really long. Okay. This is a great question. Thank you. Does the position of the adverb change the meaning of the sentence? No. In almost every case, no. But it changes the emphasis of the sentence. If I lead with the adverb, fortunately, luckily, that generally is considered the most important moment. It's you lead with that. And so the fortunate, the luck is the most important in that. If you move it towards the end, perhaps there's something else you want to emphasize. So emphasis changes, stress in the sentence, but meaning generally doesn't. Great question. All right. Yes, I apologize. I will slow down. I did go too quickly, I think. Sorry about that. You'll have a chance to re-look at the video. I did feel I was speaking too quickly in the beginning. All right. No, I've mentioned adverbs. We've seen adverbs. Adverbs can be placed anywhere in the sentence. Oh, this is interesting. There is a difference, and if you there is a difference between fast and quick. Quick is perhaps dealing with reaction and how fast you begin something. Fast deals with generally speed. But in 85% of the cases that I come across, fast and quickly are used in the same sense. So I'm going to suggest to you that you consider them as equals or synonyms. There will be if you're talking about sports medicine or any sort of related to sports or physics related to velocity or speed, then it might come into these differences will matter. But in general parlance is a fancy word for speaking. In general conversation, in general parlance, there's no difference. And I would not sweat the details. This is a great idiom. I guess it's a phrase. It's sort of I wouldn't sweat the details is an idiom that means I wouldn't worry about the details. Don't sweat the details unless you're in an area that is specific dealing with speed or velocity. Don't sweat. And there's another expression we have. It's an expression, don't sweat the small stuff. So don't sweat the small stuff means don't sweat the details or don't worry about the details. Great. My YouTube channel is coming soon. I've been promising it. It's just a matter of time. I'm looking forward to it. Someone asked about YouTube, so Oh, that's a nice word. It's not exactly related to our topic, but plethora is a fancy word for a lot. Plethora is a nice word. You have to be careful. In my experience, young learners have used this at awkward moments. So while it is a synonym, we have to be careful that it's used in the proper context. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. So what I see is that generally younger learners, intermediate and lower, will speak in a very normal standard English and then suddenly throw in a very highfalutin term. Highfalutin means very fancy term like plethora. And it just jumps out as being, it doesn't really match the rest of your language. And so it actually comes across awkward if you're not using, vocabulary at the level of plethora once in a while. Then it can come across awkward. So you have to be very careful when you use really fancy words that aren't often used, because it can suddenly throw the reader, because you're used to a sort of general English, then suddenly we have a very fancy term and it doesn't really jive or gel with the rest of your speech or sentence. Thank you. Someone has asked me to take a water. That's right. Thank you for that. I have water here. I don't know why I didn't drink it. I think I was coughing earlier. All right. Politely. That's right. Politely. All right. Okay, great. I think we're finished. Let me just wrap up. I'll give you your homework, which I know all of you are waiting for. You love homework. So a summary of the key points is as follows. Adverbs generally end in ly, but not always. Fast, we've seen. We have others. Find a list. Adverbs can modify or describe 4 different aspects of language or speech: verbs, adverbs, adjectives, and sentences. And adverbs have flexibility within sentences, but they are used in certain areas. Certain patterns do exist that I've mentioned in this live. So let's get on to the homework. Here's your homework. For those who want to do it, obviously it's not obligatory. Obligatory means you have to do it. So this is not obligatory. It's optional. Here's your homework. Send me in my personal, you can send me a direct message. 2 examples of an adverb describing a verb, which is rather common, pre-intermediate level. An adverb describing an adjective, intermediate. An adverb describing another adverb. And perhaps the most difficult, an adverb describing a whole sentence. And so that's your homework, and I'll be happy to comment on any of those that you send. And I just want to say our time is nigh, it's up, it's finished. Thank you very much for participating, for joining me in this live. I'm going to be back the same time next Wednesday. Every Wednesday at the same time, whatever time it is in your area, this live starts at the same time every Wednesday. If you're not able to make it, that's okay. You can watch the recording. It's always saved on my account. So I want to thank you all for a very good time. Thank you for spending this time with me, and have a great evening, night, or afternoon. And see you next Wednesday. Bye-bye.